Hello everyone, in this video we're going to review the Cisco API console. In more specific, we are going to review the OpenVul, also known as PSIRT API. As with other APIs, it is highly recommended to review the documentation so we can understand how we can take advantage of this API, what are the prerequisites, what are the headers we need to use, as well as the authentication and authorization methods to have access to this API. As with other examples, there is already a repository on GitHub for PSIRT OpenVulnAPI, so we are going to review what the options are and how we can access to the calls for this API. Finally, we are going to have a quick demo for 3 or 4 different examples that will consume, or that we are going to have the examples of how we can consume this API. So let's get started. All right, this is the first website that I wanted to share with you. This is a DevNet, Cisco DevNet website, and this in a specific is showing us the PSIRT Vulnerability API documentation. If we scroll a little bit down, we are going to see a very interesting video of how the Cisco PSIRT OpenAPI works. I highly recommend to watch the video so you can understand in a briefly manner what the main usage of this API. Moving forward and a little bit down, we are going to see 3 main reasons of why we need to use the Cisco PSIRT OpenAPI, OpenVulnAPI, and the most important part is almost at the bottom of the page. On the left side, we have the Cisco API console, which is the main site that we need to review the information so we can have our credentials that we are going to use to consume API calls for OpenVulnAPI. On the right side, we have our GitHub repository. This is a repository that has been created just to deposit all the examples for taking advantage of this API. So I'm going to start by clicking on this Cisco API console so we can see what are the options on there. But before that, let me show you where the documentation available so we can understand what are the options we have for this API. As you can see, this is another Cisco DevNet site. So here you will find all the information needed to understand the basic usage as well as how we can get started to consume this API. I encourage you to review the information if you have any question or if you want to get more details about the usage of this API. Something important, and this is the option I will be reviewing through the demo that I will present to you, is the API client code. As with other APIs, we need to understand the authentication methods in terms of the credentials or the token that we need to provide in order to get a response. So this section will describe what are the options and the methods we need to provide in order to consume the API calls. We also have the security vulnerability policies and Cisco PSIRT GitHub, which is the next link that I'm going to present to you, and most important, the API reference. This API reference contains all the links as well as some examples that we can take as base in order to make our calls for this API. So I'm going to use this in our demo as mentioned a moment ago, and we will explore what the options we have and probably what are the best filters we can use along with the main use of the main options for this. Now, next link is basically the GitHub. This GitHub is basically the information and this information contains all the example codes. These example codes are predefined, have been built in order to show the usage and how we can take advantage of the information here. And well, a quick description and overview about the usage for the OpenVul API. So as you can see here, we can install the OpenVul query, or we have the options for the Docker container. Each option is 100% usable. So if you have some time to go through each one of these options, is a good way to get familiar with this OpenVul API. For now, I'm going to leave this site as at the end, because this is the site that I use as base to create my examples in Postman. So as for now, let's leave it as it is, but it's important for you to see what's inside this GitHub repository for OpenVul API. Going back to the first site, which is the main website that we need to review, we have the Cisco API console, which is basically where we need to start in order to get our account activated and enabled, so we can configure our OpenVul API credentials. So once you click here, it will take you to this part, and you will need to register if you don't have an account, or B, you need to log in into the Cisco API console. We have different options that are basically, we have the information there, but the most important part is just in the middle, when we have all the documentation, the interactive API, and my apps and keys. This is the place where we are going to configure our credentials for the OpenVul API, and this is where we will working to get the information. So once we click on my apps and key, we should be reviewing the information. So this is basically my temporary key and my temporary client secret, and we can change the information every time that we want to do. We have application on the left side, and on the next tab we have the option to provide and to configure new pair of keys. The one option, one interesting item that I would like to share with you is that OpenVul or PSIRT API is not the unique API that you can set up using your Cisco API console. You can configure and you can set up any of these APIs. Is upon the need, and well, it's up to you how you want to configure. So for this example, I'm going to use this option here, which is the Cisco PSIRT OpenVul API. And then, well, you can see there are some rate limits, 10 calls per second, and we have 5,000 calls per day. It's a very good call. It's a very amount of calls, and well, the limit is pretty much good. And on the left side, you can see where these credentials were created. What is the status of those credentials? Again, these are the temporary credentials. You can change whenever you want, but this is important because you need to provide those credentials in order to get the token for the OpenVul API. So the process to create your OpenVul API is as follows. You need to click on register a new API, and it will take you to the form that you need to fill out. First of all, you need to define a name. You can put any name that you want. For instance, my API or my PSIRT API, for instance. You can add an application description. This is totally optional and it's up to you. And the most important part, at least for me, is to choose at least one grant type. Grant type is the authentication methods we are going to use to consume the OpenVul API. In our case, we need to check the client credential checkbox. One important note here is that even though we can check all one or more, or if even we can check all of them, we only need to check the client credentials. If you check client credentials plus any other option, you might get the error when you want to get the token for OpenVul API. So for now, let's just click and check the client credential checkbox. And well, in my opinion, is more than enough to select or check the Cisco PSIRT OpenVul checkbox. So we are going to check here, and we need to agree the terms of service, click on register, and you will get the following credentials that I showed you a moment ago. So let me go back to my applications and keys. So if everything goes well, you will get the key and you will get the client secret. So this is important because, as mentioned, we need to get this information in order to get our token, and we need the token to perform the calls to get and modify information. Right. So once we have the information, the next step is to review the the examples, and this is where this GitHub repository is useful. This repository contains some examples. So if you are familiar with any of these programming languages, you can take advantage of the example I already created, and well, you can clone this repository in your own machine, and you can run the scripts based on the PHP, Ruby, or JavaScript. For me, I'm going to take the first example, which is the core example, because this is one of the easiest way to make a call using HTTP or HTTP methods, protocol. So I'm going to take this as an example to make the call. This is just an example, so it's not intended to provide a full description of every single API option that OpenVul has, but this is just an example of one, how we can get our token, and two, how we can use that token to perform a call. One important thing is to understand what are the information needed to perform the call. So as you can see here, one option is the client secret, and the client secret is exactly what we have here. Okay, not here, but here is the key and the client secret. So the client secret is going to be here, and we also need to provide the client ID. So the client ID for our side here is translated into the key, and the client secret is exactly what it is here on the core option. The grant type, client credentials. That's why it's important to only check the client credentials checkbox in my applications. Otherwise, we will get an error. And the last part is probably one of the most important part, which is the HTTPS URL that we are going to use to get our token. This is just an example of how the code would look like. As you can see, we have the application form on URL encoded. This is also important because if we want to run the same thing in Postman, for instance, we need to make sure to provide the good application format, or the correct content type. Once we have the information, we are going to receive a token, access token, and well, this token is valid for 3,600 seconds, which is an hour. So after the hour, we need to renew our token, making the call again. Once we have our token, next step is to use this token in a call. For this call, in this example, is to get the latest Advisories. So on the PSIRT, and if you are not familiar with the term, the PSIRT are basically the format of Cisco um, to provide the vulnerabilities of one or more of the Cisco product. So if you run this URL or you run this core call, you will get the latest 10 advisories in general. So that's important to mention because we need to provide the exact information to get the exact result, right? So now that we understand how we are going to use the access token, how we are going to get the access token based on the client secret and client credentials, it's a good time to go back to the documentation and review what options we have. So again, we need to go to, let me see here where the option, okay, this is the link I was showing you a moment ago. And basically we have the following options. Starting at the top of the options, we can query the PSIRT by advisory ID. Okay, we click on it. This is basically the URL that we need to review if we want to review or we want to get an advisory information or a PSIRT information based on advisory ID. This is the URL that we need to use in our call. We can also obtain all the advisories depending on which application or which option you are using. Then, well, you will get all the information in just one page or different pages. Right? We also have the option to query or get information based on a CVE ID. We have an option and we have the example in a moment, but basically we are using the same base URL, api.cisco.com security advisories. The only part that is changing is the CVE slash CVE ID. We have the options for Cisco iOS, okay, Cisco iOS XE, NXOS, and NXOS for ACI. Even though you don't see the options on the list, this OpenVulnAPI allows you to perform the same queries for other Cisco products. In my example, I'm going to show you how to use this OpenVulnAPI for security products. That means ICE, Firepower, and ASA. If you want to review in more details, you can always go back to the documentation if you want to learn more about the filters you can implement. You can also implement pagination, and you also have some examples of the output you should receive. Right? So now that we are familiar with the documentation, we already reviewed the repository that you can download. As you can see, the only option, at least for a person or people who are not familiar with any of these programming languages, and if you are a study or if you are a CCA DevNet associate, well, the first option and my advice is to use this core example. Now I want to show you that based on the output, okay, and once I got familiar with the output and the method we need to use to get the token and to make the calls, what I did is to use my good friend Postman in order to make the calls. These 4 or 5 options are going to be available on my GitHub repository. So if you want to get these options, well, I encourage you to review my repository that I'm going to share on the description of the video. But for now, let's have a look at the first call for the Postman, and let's see how the core option has been translated into a Postman, right? So first of all, we have the content type application www form URL encoded. This is exactly what I have here, okay, in the body, www form or URL encoded. So at this point, I'm already covered this section. The next section is the client ID and client secret. Again, we already have those credentials, and those credentials are part of the body. We have client ID here, okay, and we have the client secret. One main difference of this OpenVuln API versus other APIs for other Cisco products is the grant type. So unlike other security or other security Cisco product, grant type is not used on other APIs, but is a mandatory field on this type of API. So we need to copy this client credentials from grant type and paste on the body, as you can see here. So we have grant type and client credentials. My advice is to copy and paste the client data and the secret, create variables for each one of the data, and create your environment so you don't need to copy and paste the same information on every single call that you make. I'm not going to do that right now because I want to show you how this code looks like, but this is my advice in order to have a more dynamic environment. So once we have the client is secret and grant type, we need to review the authorization. As you can see, the authorization is in blank because we already defined the client ID and the client secret here. So we only need to provide the post and the URL. So this URL that we are seeing here is exactly the same the URL that we are seeing here. Basically, we are just copy and pasting, and we are going to use the post method in order to get our token. So if everything goes well, and once I click on send, I'm going to receive my token, okay? And the token type is bearer, and the expiration is 1 hour as we mentioned. Based on this, I'm going to copy my token and I'm going to use it on my further calls. The next call is get the latest 10 advisories, which is exactly the same example that we have in this repository, but in this case I'm going to make the call using Postman instead of call. I'm going to upload another video explaining the script I'm developing just to get different options for each one of these calls, but at this moment my goal is just to show you how you can take advantage of this OpenVulnAPI in order to get PSIRT information, right? So we have the get latest 10 advisory. Again, it is exactly the same example that we have in the repository. The only thing that I need to update and change is the token that I got a moment ago. Click on send. As you can see, the URL is the same as we are seeing here, okay? And we have a status code of 200, that means a good call. And we have the advisory. And please note here that the advisory is not product related or product specific. That means it will show us the latest 10 advisories that Cisco has published. For instance, we have Cisco SD-WAN managed software information, but also we have the Cisco Unified Customer Voice Portal. We have the box ID or the box ID. We have the CVE information. We have the URL that we can we can copy and we can paste if we want to get more information. When this PSIRT was published, when this PSIRT was updated, what is the status of this PSIRT, what are the product names, what is the severity, okay, is defined as medium, and a quick summary of the vulnerability. So let's suppose that we are working on a SOC or a NOC and we have asked to get the latest 10 vulnerabilities advisories from Cisco for all the security, all these Cisco products. This one single call can help us and we will save time instead of searching one by one. So as you can see, we have for Cisco Unify, we also have information. Okay, this for instance is our Cisco Firepower Device Manager, and we have the product names. That means that what are all the features, all the version affected by this PSIRT, and we also have the summary as with the other PSIRTs, right? So as mentioned before, and if we go back to the documentation over here, we also have the ability to query the CVE or to query the vulnerability by CVE. This is my second example. Okay, I'm going to click here, and I took this CVE as an example. By the way, this CVE is ICE CVE. Let's copy it and paste it on Google and see what are the options. Okay, Cisco Identity Services Engine, sensitive information. This PC has already published, but the important part for our example is the advisor ID. So what I did is to copy, okay, and paste it on my URL along with authorization. Okay, for the authorization we need to use our token. Let me copy one more time and let me paste it here. So on this moment we already know what the this CVE ID belongs to, but let's suppose that we only receive this Cisco CVE ID. We don't have enough information about this CVE ID, and of course we can Google it, but if you already know about how to use OpenVulnAPI, this is going to be much easier to find the information. So I'm going to paste, I pasted the token, I'm going to click on send and wait for the result, and there you go. So we have the advisory ID, which is exactly the same that we pasted. We have the advisory title, Cisco Identity Services, sensitive information disclosure. If we go back to our Google, well, this is exactly the same information. We have the box ID associated with this PSIRT or this advisory. We have the CVEs. We have the score. This is important, and we have the information about when this was published, when was the last time it was updated, the final status, and well, the summary of the device. Of the advisory. What else we have? We have the CVE. The previous call was regarding the ID. Now we have the CVE. This is a different CVE, as you can see. Let me copy this. I took this from Google because I wanted to show you the exact information that we see in Google. We can search it and we can find it easier and faster from this powerful API. So for instance, this CVE ID belongs to ASA. That's another Cisco product. And this ASA and Fire FTD software web service interface cross-site scripting vulnerability. At this time, we are not looking at the advisor ID, but we are looking at the CVE ID. That's another data that you can find in the official PSIRT announcement. But for now, let's just have this CVE ID. Okay. Again, I need to copy and paste my token. That's why I'm recommending to you to have variables in your Postman environment, so you don't need to copy and paste 100% or 100,000 times. Let's click on send one more time, see what information we got, and well, as you can see, we have the same advisor ID. We have the advisory title, again the same information. Another example, and very useful from my perspective, is search the advisories based on a product. Okay, if we go back to the documentation, we can also query based on product name. We have iOS XE, ASA, Firepower, ICE, ACI, etc. I'm not going through all the options. I just wanted to give you an example, and then you can download the calls from my repository and test it by yourself. So in my case, I'm going to change to Firepower, so you can see the call is still working. I'm going to copy and going to paste my token and see what happens. All right, we have all the advisories for the product. In this case, the product is Firepower. So as you can see, the advisory title is Firepower Device Management. If we scroll a little bit down, we are going to see more information. Here we have Cisco Adaptive Security Appliance and Cisco Firepower Threat Defense. I have 0.0. Okay, wow, this is the most recent FTD Firepower version, so that's critical, at least for me. IPsec denial of service vulnerability, and if we scroll down, we are going to get more information. So for instance, here we have Firepower Extensible Operating System, FXOS. We have NXOS information, but we should see information about the FXOS versions affected by this advisory. Well, just thinking about if you are asked to get all the advisories for a specific platform, well, you will need to search one by one on Google, for instance. But with this call, you will save a lot of time, and well, you will have the accurate information. Okay. Last but not least, and just to give you an overview, you can also get the advisories by the year of the advisory was published. I'm not going to do that, but I will show you what is the output of having the advisories by SIR, which is, if I'm not wrong, is the severity. Let me search for the information just to make sure I'm using the correct way. Okay, security impact rating. That means critical, high, medium, or low. Okay, if we want to get all the advisories with a security impact rating of critical, we can filter out by this word. If we want to get only the high security impact rating advisories, we can also do that. So let's do that right now. Let me copy the token one more time. Okay, and let me get the information. Please notice here that we are using a filter of dates. That means 2021-03, which is March 18, to 2021-06, which is June 23. So we are going to get the information from March to June 2021. Okay, so what I'm expecting to have the start date with the end date is the PSIRT for, let me check, I think I made a mistake because I'm pasting the wrong one. Okay, all right, so we have the correct token. So what I'm expecting to have, as you can see here, is the advisories with the security impact rating of high. Okay, I'm not going to get the criticals, I'm not going to get the medium or low, only the high security impact. And well, the filter is going to be the March to June. So let me click on send and see what we got. Okay, this is the information. As you can see, we have March 2021. We also have CVE, and please take a look at the security impact defined or classified as high. Again, this is not only for Cisco ASA, this is not only for Cisco ASA, but all the advisories okay, between March and June with security impact of high. If we have, or if we want to change the classification or the security impact, we can easily do that by changing the URL of the data in this URL, right? In conclusion, my advice is to play with this API. Try to get information. Try to combine 2 or 3 different data. For instance, we can search for product, or we can get a start date. Try to increase the start date and the end date so we can get more information. And just imagine that you are working in a project where you need to get all the PSIRTs, all the advisories by a year. Well, you can work on this through Google, but as you can see with this API, the time consuming is much less than if you were working on Google searching one PSIRT by a time. And well, on my next video, I'm going to show you the final script I'm developing. But as for now, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on my next video.